Sit down before I remind you what happens to people like you in my courtroom. The words crack like a whip across marble and wood. Air leaves the room. 17-year-old Ava Taylor stands in the center of 100 staring eyes. Black robes on the bench. Suits in the gallery. A chain at her father's wrists. Dylan Taylor doesn't look up. He can't. The steel between his hands drags at his shoulders like a verdict already spoken. Your Honor, my father is innocent. The gavel detonates. Security remove this child. Ava doesn't move. The bailiff's polished steps tap toward her. The prosecutor, Grant Allen, flips a page like this is routine, like a daughter's plea is a traffic ticket. Snickers ripple from the cheap seats, cruel little waves that break against her spine. She breathes once, straightens, lifts her chin. The room comes into frightening focus. Dust spirals in light from a high window. A vein throbs in Judge Harris's temple. A tear carves a clean track through grit on Dylan's cheek. Miss Taylor, Harris says, slow and savoring. This is not youth group or neighborhood drama. This is a court of law. Ava turns, only enough to see her father's hands tremble. He's built houses with those hands. He's carried her sleeping from car to bed with those hands. Today the cuffs make them look small. Something tightens inside her, a knot that clicks locked instead of snapping. Fear shrivels. Heat rises. Remove. Her, Harris repeats. Leather squeaks. The bailiff reaches. Touch me, Ava says softly, and you'll escort me to the lectern instead of the door. A small, disbelieving laugh escapes the prosecutor. Harris leans forward. Are you threatening an officer of the court? No, Ava replies, even, I'm promising to use it. Her voice doesn't echo. It lands. She feels the bailiff hesitate. Half a beat. And in that space, she sees everything the room wants from her. Collapse, apology, retreat. She gives them none. She steps one pace closer to the defense table until she can smell the cold on her father's jumpsuit and the copper fear in his breath. Dad, she whispers, not taking her eyes off Harris. Don't look down. Dylan lifts his head. The smallest nod passes between them, a wire pulled taut. The gallery quiets. The judge's stare hardens, pleased to have found a moment he thinks he can break. Counsel, Harris says to Allen, are you prepared to proceed without interruption? I live for it. Allen answers smoothly, already practicing the smile he'll wear on the courthouse steps. Ava's fingers curl around the edge of the table to stop their shaking. Underneath her palm is a scratch in wood shaped like a question mark. She decides to answer it, not with a shout, not with tears, with precision. Your Honor, she says, if the court is finished with insults, may I speak to the matter at hand? Murmurs. The bailiff glances at Harris. The judge indulges himself with a smirk. On what authority would a teenager speak in this courtroom? On the authority of the truth, she says, and only then does she turn to face the jury, letting them see the fight in her eyes. And because the person who should be speaking for him has already decided not to, two jurors look at each other. Allen's jaw tightens a millimeter. Harris taps the gavel once. Warning, not strike. One more outburst. It's not an outburst, Ava replies, quiet and surgical. It's a record. The prosecutor tries to reclaim the air. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're seeing now is exactly why. Ava raises a hand. Not high, just enough to slice his rhythm. You'll hear from the state about patterns, she says to the jury, about a man who snapped. But pattern as a cousin, practice. You'll see how something that looks like justice can be practiced into a performance. Today you'll be asked to applaud a performance. I'm asking you to watch the hands. Allen blinks. Harris lifts an eyebrow. Even the bailiff forgets to reach. Ava doesn't smile. She doesn't grandstand. She simply steadies her breathing until her voice sits low and sure, the way Dylan taught her to breathe through pain when she sprained her wrist on the playground and wanted to scream. You want me removed because you think I'm noise, she says to Harris. I'm not noise. I'm evidence you can hear. Silence again, but different, attentive, expectant. A phone vibrates somewhere and dies quick. A clerk coughs and then doesn't dare cough again. Ava lets the quiet stretch just enough to pull the room forward. 3 months ago, she says, My father left for work before sunrise and came home with concrete dust in his eyelashes and a smile for my homework. 3 months ago, no one in this room had said his name like a curse. 3 months ago, I know how a system smiles while it bleeds you. Her eyes flicked to Alan, to the tidy stack of accusations, to the paper clips aligned like soldiers. Now I do. Harris raps the gavel, annoyed to find himself listening. Miss Taylor, I will not permit. You already did, she answers. When you call me, people like you open the record to who you are. I'm here to open the record to what you've done. A ripple moves through the gallery. Someone whispers, Lord. Another hushes them. The bailiff, caught between duty and doubt, steps back a fraction. Ava turns to her father. He watches her like a man who's been treading water and just saw a lighthouse blink on. Breathe, she mouths. He does. She faces the bench again. You want me silent because I'm young, because I'm a girl, because I'm black, because it's easier than being fair. But here's the problem. You can't silence what I've learned. Harris's fingers tighten around the gavel. Last warning. Ava nods, as if she's agreeing to leave. Last warning noted, she says. Then, calm as storm glass, she slides one step back from the blast radius of his anger and speaks to the jury like she's letting them in on a secret the room doesn't want them to hear. You'll hear a story today, she says. A clean story. A supervisor victim. A violent worker. A daughter too blind with love to see what's in front of her. That story is convenient. It's also wrong. Alan rises. Objection. Ava gestures slightly, palm open, inviting the objection to sit beside her words instead of over them. I won't waste your time with speeches, she continues. I'll show you why the clean story requires dirt to survive. You'll see where the cameras were broken. You'll see which forms were filed after the ink was dry on a contract that never should have existed. You'll see how a sentence can be decided before a trial begins, and how a single word, unsafe, turns into unemployed, then indicted, then guilty. Harris inhales to strike. Ava meets his eyes. She doesn't blink. And before you try to throw me out, Your Honor, she says softly, know this. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to make a record you can't erase. The judge's mouth thins. The gavel wavers. The room waits to see which way power will fall. Ava finally lowers her hand from the table. She can feel her pulse in her wrists, a drum she refuses to let the room hear. Bailiff, she says without looking, you may escort me forward. For a beat too long, no one breathes. Then, another beat, another. Harris gestures, not to the door, but to the lectern. It's a petty, furious gesture meant to look like control. It looks like permission. Ava steps up, with beneath her fingers, lights hot on her face, the jury close enough to hear truth without a microphone. She scans her eyes the way she learned to skin paragraphs, looking for what's missing, not just what's there. My name is Ava Taylor, she says, voice clean. And I'm here because the one person paid to defend my father decided a quick deal was cheaper than the truth. A juror flinches. Alan's nostrils flare. The public defender, Richard Cole, shifts in his seat, like a man who wants to be anywhere else. Ava lets that land. Then she lowers her voice further, forcing the room to lean in. You don't know me, she says, but you will, not because I'm loud, because I'm prepared. Dylan's chains clink once as his shoulders square. He looks 10 years younger in a breath. Ava places a single sheet on the lectern, blank. She wants them to see that the performance happens with, or without paper. The state will try to rush you, she tells the jury. I'm going to slow you down. Watch the hands. On the bench, Harris lifts the gavel again, trying to reassert the script. Alan opens his mouth to object. Ava speaks first, precise as a scalpel. 3 months earlier, she says, and the room shifts as if the floor itself is moving beneath them. The first piece of evidence in this case wasn't a photo or a form. It was a book. She looks past the judge, past the seal, toward the high window where light keeps a stubborn hold, and the promise written inside it. She breathes in once, steady. Here's how it began. 3 months earlier, the world still felt like it could be fixed. The Taylor apartment in East Cleveland was small enough that the fridge hummed louder than the TV. But inside that cramped space, Ava Taylor was building a universe of her own. Stacks of yellowed law books surrounded her like fortress walls. Constitutional law, civil rights review, trial procedure. The scent of old pages mixed with the warmth of her mother's cooking drifting in from the kitchen. "Dad," Ava called out, holding up a cracked spine labeled Gideon versus Wainwright. "Why do you keep all these if you're just a construction worker?" Dylan Taylor leaned against the doorframe, his boots caked with dried concrete dust, the day's labor still clinging to his clothes. He smiled the way only tired men do, like every grin costs energy he's willing to spend. "Because knowledge," he said, lowering himself beside her, "is the one thing they can't take from us, baby girl." His hands were rough, skin split at the knuckles, but his eyes gleamed sharp and calm, the kind of intelligence the world overlooks until it's too late. "I work with my hands, but I think with my mind," he continued. "These books, they're insurance." Ava turned one over in her lap. Insurance against what? Dylan looked at her for a long moment, his silence heavy with all the things he couldn't protect her from. "Against a world that tries to make you small," he said finally. For a while they sat in the hum of the apartment. Two dreamers in a place that forgot what dreams looked like. Ava's walls weren't covered with movie stars or glittering lights. They were plastered with photocopies of old court rulings and handwritten notes in blue ink. Justice isn't charity. It's math. It must add up. That night, they gathered at the dinner table. Her mother, Renee, tired from double shifts at the hospital, setting out steaming bowls of mac and cheese. It wasn't much, but it smelled like love. "So, what's new at school?" Dylan asked, his voice playful but expectant. Ava grinned. "Mrs. Peterson says I should apply to Howard. She says pre-law would suit me." Renee paused mid-bite. "Howard's expensive," she said softly, almost apologetic. Dylan reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. "We'll find a way," he said. "Ava's got something in her. You can see it in how she argues, even when she's wrong." Ava laughed, and the sound filled the tiny kitchen. But under the laughter, her father's faith sank deep into her bones. Later that night, she opened one of his old books again. Inside, his handwriting curved across the margin. "If they ever call me guilty, you'll know the truth." She didn't understand what it meant then. She would. The next morning, the call came. Renee screamed before Ava even picked up the phone. "What happened?" Ava asked, the phone trembling in her mother's hand. "Your father, there's been an accident at the site." The word accident always hides something darker. By noon, Ava was standing behind yellow tape downtown, watching paramedics swarm the half-built skyscraper her father's crew had been working on. The air smelled of metal, dust, and panic. Reporters were already scribbling notes. A crane loomed overhead, its operator stumbling, shouting something about miscommunication. A foreman barked orders, voice slicing through the noise. Jack Reynolds, her father's supervisor, a man known for his short temper and long memory. He was yelling at the police, painting a story before anyone could ask questions. "Your dad's inside," one worker whispered to her. "He's okay, I think." Ava pushed through the crowd until she saw him, Dylan, in handcuffs. "Dad!" she cried out, but two officers blocked her. "Step back, ma'am." "Ma'am," she echoed, the word foreign on her tongue. Behind the barricade, Dylan's face was streaked with sweat and disbelief. "Tell your mom I'm fine," he shouted as they led him away. But his voice cracked. By the time they reached the station, the headlines were already written. Foreman injured in site altercation. Worker charged with assault. The official report read like a lie smoothed by polish. Worker became aggressive after safety complaint. Supervisor, Jack Reynolds, sustained head trauma. No mention of the drunk crane operator. No mention of the shove. Ava watched the detective write motive, anger in his report. Her mother's voice trembled behind her. "We'll get a lawyer, right?" "A good one." They got Richard Cole, a public defender who looked like he hadn't slept in months. "Williams, Taylor, construction assault," he muttered, scrolling his computer. "Look, sweetheart, they're offering 2 years. He should take it." Ava froze. 2 years? For defending himself. Cole didn't even look up. Black defendant. White victim. In this county, 2 years is a gift. Renee whispered, but what if we fight it? Cole laughed, dry, hopeless. Then he's looking at Tan. The walls of the small office closed in. The hum of fluorescent lights grew unbearable. Ava's throat felt tight. Can we get another lawyer? Private attorneys cost $50,000. Cole said, clicking his pen. You got $50,000? Her mother said nothing. That night, Ava sat at her desk, staring at her unopened college letters. Harvard, Yale, Columbia, all waiting, like promises from another life. Outside, the sirens of Cleveland wailed like a prophecy. Her father's words echoed in her mind. These books, their insurance. She opened one, fingers trembling, and just like that, her education began, not in a classroom, but in the space between injustice and truth. But what she discovered next would shatter everything she thought she knew about justice. The Cleveland skyline looked different when viewed through police station glass. Every light outside seemed to belong to someone else's life, someone who wasn't waiting for a verdict. Ava sat between her mother and silence. The public defender had disappeared down the hall. Dylan Taylor sat in a cell behind them, his hands still rough with work, now cuffed behind his back. The skin on his knuckles was split from a fight he hadn't started. When the door finally opened, the detective didn't look at them. Charges are confirmed. He'll be transferred to county holding. For how long? Renee asked. Until trial, the detective said, if it gets that far. He closed the door, leaving behind a faint smell of coffee and authority. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She logged into the Cleveland Municipal Court's public database, the same one her teachers used for mock trials. Only this time, she wasn't pretending. She clicked through file after file, looking for any case presided over by Judge Harris. At first, it seemed random. Then the pattern emerged. Black defendants with white victims. Average sentence, 8 years. White defendants with black victims. 18 months. Her stomach turned cold. She kept digging until sunrise, her desk littered with notes and highlighters. She found names, 43 of them, each one crushed by the same gavel. Her mother's voice called from the kitchen, shaky with exhaustion. Ava, eat something. Please. But Ava barely heard. Mom, he's not just biased. He's systematic. Renee set down a plate of toast, eyes weary. Baby, you can't fight judges. That's how people disappear. Then they'll have to find me first, Ava whispered. That afternoon, she went to school for the first time in weeks. Her guidance counselor, Ms. Rivera, caught her outside the library. Ava, Harvard called about your deposit. You need to respond. Ava held the acceptance letter, like it was written to a stranger. I can't leave him. Ms. Rivera sighed. Your father would want you to go. Ava met her eyes. My father wants justice. The counselor hesitated, her sympathy turning brittle. Sometimes the people we love make mistakes. That sentence hit harder than any verdict. In the cafeteria, whispers followed Ava like shadows. Her best friend Chloe cornered her near the vending machines. You're falling apart, she said. You miss finals. You barely talk. Everyone's worried. Then stop worrying, Ava replied. Come on, Ava. Everyone saw the report. He attacked his boss. Just because you can't face it doesn't mean. Ava's stare cut through her words. Your dad never worked outside an office. Mine's built half the city. Don't tell me what men like him are. Chloe stepped back. You're choosing him over your future. I'm choosing the truth, Ava said and walked away. That evening, she parked outside the courthouse and watched the building glow like a temple to everything she hated. Lawyers in tailored suits glided up the steps. Their laughter echoed off the stone. Then, a court clerk came out for a smoke. Older, tired eyes. Ava recognized him from her library visits. Excuse me, sir, she said softly. I'm doing research on Judge Harris's court for a school project. The clerk froze, then gave a short, bitter laugh. Child, take your project somewhere safe. That man ruins people for sport. Ava frowned. But there must be oversight, complaints, appeals? He looked at her with pity. You still think the system cares about right and wrong. Harris has friends in high places and enemies with no jobs. Her throat tightened. Then what happens to people like my dad? He flicked ash onto the pavement. They become warnings. The cigarette hissed out in a puddle, leaving smoke and silence. Ava stayed there until night swallowed the courthouse. Every window looked like an eye watching her. She whispered to herself, if the system's written against us, then I'll rewrite it. The next morning, the county jail smelled like bleach and fear. Dylan sat across the glass from her, his orange jumpsuit loosed around his shoulders. He smiled for her sake, but his eyes were hollow. Baby girl, he said to the phone, maybe I should take the plea. Ava's voice broke. Dad, no. I can survive 2 years. 2 years is too long for innocence, she said. He gestured around the room, the rows of families clutching phones, tears blurring the reflection of glass. You see justice here? You see fairness. Her grip on the receiver tightened. Then I'll make them see it. Dylan shook his head. Don't waste your life fighting a machine that doesn't break. Machines break, Ava whispered, when you hit the right part. He laughed softly, and for the first time in days, she saw him again, the man who taught her courage. Then fight smart, he said, not angry. That night, Ava opened his old law books again. The page he landed on read, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial and have the assistance of counsel. She traced the words with her fingertip. Assistance of counsel. Her father had counsel. He just didn't have help. She searched the database again, scrolling through endless pages until she found it. People v. Sharp, Ohio, 1987. Family assistance in cases of inadequate counsel. Her heart pounded. It wasn't much, but it was a door half open and waiting. For days she devoured everything she could find. Case law, objections, procedural manuals. She filled notebooks with cross-examination strategies and memorized the order of trial proceedings. Mrs. Porter, the librarian, watched her with worry. You'll collapse if you don't rest. Ava smiled weakly. Rest comes after freedom. By the second week, she wasn't a student anymore. She was an apprentice to justice itself. She spent 12 hours a day under flickering lights, surrounded by books and silence. Each page became a weapon. Each precedent, a step closer. When she looked up from the pages, dawn had broken again. She whispered to the window, They think I'm just a kid. Let's see what a kid can do. 2 days before the hearing, Ava walked into jail again. Dylan rose as she entered. I found a way, she said, setting down her notes. He frowned. A way? A clause. Section 841.2 of the Ohio Criminal Code. It says a defendant can request help from family if counsel's inadequate. Dylan's brow furrowed. Ava, you're 17. You don't know what you're up against. Her eyes blazed. I know exactly what I'm up against. A judge who hides bias behind the law. A prosecutor who counts wins instead of lives. And a system that assumes you're guilty because you exist. He stared at her, stunned. She pressed her hand to the glass. You once told me knowledge is insurance. It's time to cash it in. A slow smile spread across his face, fragile but proud. Then let's go to war, baby girl. East Cleveland didn't sleep the night Ava Taylor decided to fight the law. Streetlights hummed over cracked pavement while she sat by the window. Pages of handwritten notes spread like battle plans. Legal pads filled with citations, dates, and witness lists covered her desk. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but adrenaline kept her hand steady. By dawn, she'd memorized entire sections of the Ohio Criminal Code. Every loophole became a stepping stone. Every ruling, a weapon. She whispered the cases like prayers. Feta v. California, 1975. People v. Sharp, 1987. They were more than precedent. They were survival. When she wasn't studying, she was hunting. She read every article about Judge Harris, every interview, every speech where he boasted about being tough on crime. The phrase burned into her brain. It was coded language, and she knew exactly who that crime looked like. At the Cleveland Public Library, Ava had become a fixture. She arrived before the doors opened, claimed her corner table, and stayed until the lights dimmed. Mrs. Porter, the librarian, began leaving extra granola bars and bottled water beside her. "You remind me of my niece," she said one night, voice soft. She thought she could fix the world, too. Ava smiled faintly. Maybe she still can. Mrs. Porter hesitated. "You know what you're doing is dangerous, right?" Ava didn't look up. So is the silence. The next morning, she printed everything. 3 binders, each thick enough to crush a lie. Binder 1, judicial bias. Binder 2, procedural failures. Binder 3, statistical disparities. By page 147, she'd found the pattern nobody wanted to see. Judge Harris's courtroom wasn't a place of law. It was a factory, one that produced longer sentences for black defendants and faster acquittals for white ones. She built charts, color-coded graphs, side-by-side comparisons. 43 cases told the same story. The evidence wasn't just compelling. It was explosive. Later that day, she stopped by her high school to pick up transcripts she might never use. The hallway buzzed with laughter, college posters, and futures that felt foreign. Ms. Rivera called her into the office. "Ava, Harvard extended your deadline. They're still waiting." Ava exhaled. "Tell them I'll apply when my father's free." Ms. Rivera's tone hardened. "You're gambling your future for something you can't change." Ava's jaw tightened. That's what they said about segregation, too. Ms. Rivera froze, then looked down. "You're going to burn out." "Then I'll burn bright," Ava said, and left. The more she uncovered, the uglier the truth became. Judge Harris's name kept appearing in city financial records, linked to Reynolds Construction, her father's employer. Every project Reynolds won was one where Harris's approval or zoning oversight played a role. And every worker who filed a safety complaint somehow ended up in Harris's courtroom. Coincidence didn't stretch that far. Ava's next move was dangerous. She needed a witness. She found Luis Vega, the security guard from the site, listed as unavailable for comment in the police report. For 3 hours, she waited outside the construction gate, cold wind biting at her face. Finally, a tired man in a faded uniform walked toward the parking lot. "Mr. Vega?" she called softly. He stopped, suspicious. "Who's asking?" "Ava Taylor, Dylan Taylor's daughter." His expression darkened. "I told the police everything I know." "No, you didn't," she said, stepping closer. "Because the report says you were unavailable." He shook his head. "Look, kid, I got mouths to feed. I can't lose this job." Ava held up a printed article. "Construction worker faces 10 years after supervisor's injury. They're sending my father to prison for defending himself. You saw what happened, didn't you?" Luis took a long drag of his cigarette, eyes darting to the office window. "More. Reynolds is connected. His family owns half the city's contracts. People who talk don't work here anymore. And people who stay quiet let the next man go to prison." Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, courage, maybe both. "There's footage," he said quietly. Ava's pulse jumped. "What footage?" "The cameras. They weren't broken like Reynolds said. I saved the files." Her heart pounded. "Can you show me?" Luis looked over his shoulder. "Follow me." Inside the security office, dust floated through pale light. He inserted a flash drive. The screen lit up with the date of the incident. "There's your dad," Luis said. Ava leaned in, breath caught. The video showed her father approaching Reynolds calmly, pointing toward a crane operator swaying unsteadily. Reynolds shoved him hard. Dylan stumbled but didn't fight back until Reynolds swung again. Then one push. Reynolds fell into the rebar. "That's self-defense," Ava whispered. Luis nodded. He didn't attack. He tried to stop a drunk man from killing someone. Reynolds wanted him gone. Said he was trouble. Ava's eyes burned. "Why didn't you show this to the police?" Luis ejected the drive. "Because Reynolds' brother-in-law owns Harris and Associates, the judge's family firm. They've been trading contracts for years. You think anyone wants that exposed?" The pieces snapped into place like a trap closing. Ava clutched the USB drive as if it were her father's heartbeat. This changes everything. Louis stared at her. It could also destroy you. Ava straightened. Then it's worth it. That night, she didn't sleep. She watched the footage again and again, frame by frame. It wasn't just evidence of innocence. It was proof of corruption. And now, she had something even the judge couldn't silence. The truth caught on camera. But exposing it would mean walking straight into the lion's den. Ava opened her laptop and started writing a motion, her first real legal document. Her fingers shook, but the words came clear. Motion to permit familial assistance under Section 841.2. Counsel deemed inadequate. She signed her name at the bottom. Ava Taylor, daughter of the defendant. By morning, she was ready to fight. But the system she was about to challenge had claws deeper than she knew, and it had no intention of losing. The morning sun crawled to the blinds, cutting sharp lines across Ava's desk. She'd been awake all night, running her motion through the printer one last time. The words on the page weren't perfect, but they were legal enough to scare someone who underestimated her. And that was exactly the point. At 8 a.m. sharp, Ava walked into the Cleveland Municipal Courthouse. Heads turned. She wasn't supposed to belong there. Too young, too composed, too black, too confident. Her backpack hung heavy with binders, legal codes, and a USB drive that could free her father or end her future. She moved through the metal detectors like a ghost who'd already made peace with consequence. When she reached the clerk's desk, she placed her motion on the counter. "For Judge Harris's docket," she said. The clerk glanced at the paper, then at her. "You're not an attorney." Ava met her gaze. "No, I'm something scarier, his problem." By noon, the filing had reached Harris's chambers. He read it once, then again, frowning deeper each time. A 17-year-old had cited state statutes, federal rulings, and even his own prior case law. He couldn't dismiss it without exposing his bias. So he scheduled a hearing. 2 days later, the courthouse was packed. Reporters lined the hallway, cameras flashing. The headline had already begun to circulate: "Teenager to represent her father in court." Inside, Ava sat beside her father at the defense table. The air was thick with whispers. "You sure about this, baby girl?" Dylan murmured. Ava nodded, sliding her notes across the table. "They built the system to break us, Dad. Let's see how it handles pressure." When Judge Harris entered, the entire room stood. His black robes looked heavier than usual, as if weighed down by the lie he'd been living for years. "Miss Taylor," he said, his voice calm but razor-edged, "you are aware this request is irregular." "Irregular doesn't mean illegal," Ava replied evenly. "Under Section 841.2 of the Ohio Criminal Code, my father has a right to self-representation with familial assistance." The judge's eyes narrowed. "And what makes you think his counsel was inadequate?" Ava's tone didn't waver. "He advised my father to plead guilty without reviewing evidence or interviewing witnesses. He spent 14 minutes on the case before recommending a plea deal." The gallery gasped. Even the prosecutor, Grant Allen, glanced toward the public defender with faint disgust. Judge Harris's lips tightened. "You've done your homework, Miss Taylor." "I learned from the best," she said, glancing at her father. Allen rose from his table. "Your Honor, this is absurd. We cannot allow a child to treat felony proceedings like a classroom debate." "Then you should be confident enough to win," Ava said, her voice calm but deadly precise. Laughter rippled to the back row before Harris silenced the room with a glare. "Fine," he said finally. "Against my better judgment, I'll allow this spectacle. But any breach of decorum, any disrespect, and your father will face the maximum sentence." "Understood." Ava straightened her papers. "Crystal clear, Your Honor." The trial began. Allen opened with the arrogance of a man who'd never lost. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you'll soon see why children don't belong in courtrooms. The defendant, Dylan Taylor, has a documented history of aggression." Ava stood. "Objection. Those records were never disclosed during discovery." "Overruled," Harris snapped without hesitation. "But Brady versus Maryland." "Sit down, Miss Taylor, before I hold you in contempt." She bit her tongue. The judge wasn't just biased. He was building a wall around the truth, brick by procedural brick. Allen continued, waving papers that shimmered under fluorescent lights. We have 3 prior complaints against the defendant, all involving threats against supervisors. Ava froze. There were no such complaints in the original file. The evidence had been fabricated. Furthermore, Allen said, Mr. Reynolds suffered severe trauma. The defendant's violent outburst nearly killed him. He held up photos, Reynolds' face bandaged and bruised beyond recognition. Ava's heart hammered. She'd seen the video. Those injuries were impossible. Her father leaned toward her, whispering, "Don't. It's a trap." She whispered back, "Then let's spring it." When the prosecutor finally finished, Ava stood and walked to the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor, the prosecution has painted a dramatic picture, but the truth doesn't need makeup. It just needs light." Harris's gavel twitched in his hand. "You may proceed briefly." Ava turned to the jury, voice steady. "You've been told my father is violent. But evidence doesn't lie. People do. I have proof that the cameras at the construction site were functional, and that footage exists showing who attacked first." Allen shot to his feet. "Objection! This evidence wasn't submitted. Neither were the prosecution's fake complaints." Ava countered. "I'm simply following their example." The courtroom buzzed with shock. "Miss Taylor," Harris hissed, "you are playing with fire." Ava met his eyes. "Then maybe it's time to burn what's rotten." The jury stirred, whispering. Allen's composure cracked. "Your Honor, I moved to strike her remarks." "Denied," Harris said, too quickly, too defensive. His pulse betrayed him. Ava returned to her seat. Dylan squeezed her hand. "You just put a target on your back." "I'm not aiming to survive this, Dad," she said quietly. "I'm aiming to win." That night, she didn't sleep. She stayed up cross-referencing the prosecution's new evidence. The complaint forms had identical formatting, identical typos, identical timestamps. They'd been fabricated on the same computer. She printed everything, highlighting the flaws. The pattern was unmistakable. By sunrise, she had her next move planned, and it would shatter the courtroom's illusion of power. The next day, she stood once more before Judge Harris. Her voice was calm, her hand steady. "Your Honor," she began, "the defense would like to call its first witness." Allen smirked. "And who might that be?" Ava turned toward the gallery. "Luis Vega." A hush fell. The door opened. The security guard stepped inside, holding his hat nervously. Allen's smile vanished. Harris's face paled. "You can't be serious," the prosecutor said. "I'm very serious," Ava replied. "He's here to authenticate the footage the prosecution forgot to mention." Harris's gavel hit wood. "We'll take a 30-minute recess." But Ava didn't move. "No need, Your Honor. The truth doesn't take breaks." The gallery erupted in whispers. For the first time in 12 years, Judge Harris looked afraid. When court resumed, you could feel the tension crawling up the walls. News cameras lined the corridor outside. Inside, every seat was filled. Lawyers, students, activists, all had come to watch the teenage girl who just forced a judge to hear a case he thought he controlled. Ava Taylor walked to the lectern like someone marching into destiny. She placed her laptop on the stand, took a breath, and looked at the jury. Her father's life depended on what came next. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "the prosecution called this an open-end shut case. Let's see how open it really is." She pressed a key. The courtroom screen flickered. Static, then motion. A construction site under afternoon sun. Men in helmets. And their unmistakable Dylan Taylor, calm, gesturing toward an unstable crane operator. Then Jack Reynolds, his face red with fury. "Watch closely," Ava said. Reynolds shoved Dylan hard. Gasps rippled through the jury box. Dylan stumbled backward, hands up, not fighting, not even raising his voice. Reynolds lunged again, and Dylan defended himself with one controlled push. Reynolds went down, striking his head against stacked rebar. The room went silent, except for the hum of the projector. "That," Ava said, voice low but firm, "is self-defense, not assault." Prosecutor Grant Allen shot to his feet. "Your Honor, This footage could be manipulated. Ava didn't blink. Then let's authenticate it. Mr. Vega? The bailiff opened the side door, and Luis Vega walked in wearing a security uniform. The man everyone thought too scared to testify. Judge Harris's gavel cracked once, a warning disguised as control. Mr. Vega, are you aware of the consequences of perjury? Yes, Your Honor, Luis said, stepping to stand. And I'm also aware of the consequences of silence. The jury leaned in. Do you recognize this footage? Ava asked. I do. I recorded it myself. Luis said. The cameras were never broken. Mr. Reynolds ordered me to delete the files. Alan tried to object, but the sound died under the murmur of the crowd. Why didn't you hand this over to the police? Ava pressed. Luis looked down. Because I was threatened. They said if I spoke, I'd never work again. I've got a family, Miss Taylor. I couldn't risk it until now. Ava nodded, turning back to the jury. You just heard how truth gets buried when power writes a story. She clicked to the next slide. Financial documents projected in sharp clarity. These are public records from the city's contract database. Over 5 years, Reynolds Construction paid over $2 million to Harris & Associates, the family firm owned by Judge Harris. The courtroom erupted. Harris slammed his gavel. Order. Order in this court. Your Honor, Ava said, her voice cutting through the chaos. These are official filings. Each payment authorized while your firm handled oversight for Reynolds' projects. Every worker who reported safety violations under Reynolds sent to your courtroom. The color drained from Harris's face. Miss Taylor, one more accusation. Not accusation. Ava interrupted. Evidence. She switched to another slide. Internal emails between Reynolds and city officials, stamped and dated. These show Reynolds threatening to handle dissenters through the usual channels. Your courtroom was one of those channels. Alan was on his feet, sweating now. Objection. Irrelevant. Overruled. Harris snapped too quickly, forgetting himself. Ava tilted her head. Overruled, Your Honor. Are you sure you want that on record? The crowd gasped. Harris froze. He'd just legitimized her evidence. Ava faced the jury again. The prosecution wants you to see my father as a violent man, but the only violence here was the abuse of power. Men who thought they could destroy lives for profit. A system that punishes courage and rewards corruption. Alan fumbled his notes. The defense is grandstanding. Ava ignored him. Those fake complaints the prosecution introduced, same font, same formatting, same metadata, all created within 24 hours on a computer owned by Reynolds Construction. She clicked again, revealing the data. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Harris's gavel trembled in his grip. Miss Taylor, I will not allow this circus in my courtroom. She met his gaze. Then, maybe you should step down from the ring. The audience gasped audibly this time. Recuse yourself, Judge Harris, Ava said clearly, because this isn't just my father's trial, it's yours. The judge's face turned red, but his eyes flicked toward the reporters scribbling furiously. Every word she spoke had just become public record. Enough! Harris thundered. Bailiff. But the bailiff didn't move. Not this time. The entire room was watching. Ava turned to the jury one last time. I'm not here because I want attention. I'm here because a man who raised me to believe in the law is about to be destroyed by it. But not today. Her voice trembled now, not from fear, but from power. My father isn't the criminal here. The real criminals are sitting above us, hiding behind robes and titles. And I have 43 cases to prove it. She lifted the binder from her table, its tabs marked in red. 43 lives ruined by the same courtroom, the same bias, the same corruption. The air was electric. Every person in the room could feel it. History unfolding under fluorescent lights. Harris didn't look like a judge anymore. He looked like a man cornered by truth. Enough, he shouted again, pounding the gavel. But his voice cracked. This court will recess. No, Your Honor, Ava said, stepping forward. This court will reckon. The gavel froze midair. The silence that followed was heavy. Holy. Reporters leapt from their seats. Someone whispered, "She did it." And for the first time, Judge Harris didn't know what to say. He looked down at his trembling hand, then at the sea of faces staring back. The power he'd clung to for years was slipping, right there in front of a girl he once called child. Ava turned toward her father, who was watching her with wet eyes and quiet awe. "Hold on, Dad," she whispered. "We're almost there." And then she faced the bench again. "Your Honor," she said, steady and deliberate, "I move for your recusal and for immediate review of the corruption evidence by an independent court." The gavel dropped to the desk, not in anger this time, but in surrender. We'll recess for 15 minutes, Harris murmured. Ava exhaled for the first time in hours. Around her, people began to realize they had witnessed the moment a system cracked. But she wasn't finished yet. She still had one piece of evidence left, the one that would end everything. And when court resumed, the city of Cleveland would never be the same again. 15 minutes stretched into a lifetime. Reporters were already outside sending breaking alerts. Protesters had started gathering on the courthouse steps. Inside, whispers swirled like wine through the gallery. When Judge Harris returned, the lines on his face looked deeper, his robe heavier. He sat, stared at his trembling hands, and said quietly, "Proceed." Ava Taylor stood again, holding the final binder, one she hadn't opened yet. Her voice carried a strange calm. "Your Honor, before this recess you questioned my right to speak. But this final piece isn't about permission. It's about proof." She placed a binder on the clerk's desk. Inside are sworn affidavits from 17 construction workers who were threatened, blacklisted, or arrested after reporting safety violations against Reynolds Construction. Every case went through your courtroom. Everyone received sentences far above state guidelines. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Harris looked like a man drowning in his own past. This court acknowledges potential conflict of interest. "No, Your Honor," Ava interrupted, voice tightening. "You don't acknowledge corruption. You step down from it." Reporters surged forward. Cameras flashed. The world was watching a titan crumble. For the first time in 12 years, Harris lowered his gavel not to command silence, but to surrender it. "This court hereby recuses itself from further judgment," he said, each word dragged through regret. "A new presiding judge will be assigned immediately." The room erupted. Cheers, tears, applause. Chaos shaped like justice. Dylan Taylor bowed his head, hands shaking as if trying to hold gratitude still. Ava reached for him, and their fingers met, not through glass, not in chains, but free. An hour later, Judge Naomi Clark entered the courtroom. The contrast was immediate. Calm authority, quiet integrity. She reviewed the evidence Ava had exposed, page by page, before looking up. After reviewing the material presented by the defense, she said, "This court finds the prosecution's evidence to be fundamentally flawed and possibly fraudulent. All charges against Dylan Taylor are dismissed, effective immediately." The clang of metal echoed as the bailiff unlocked Dylan's cuffs. He rose slowly, disbelief and relief worn on his face. Then, finally, a smile, small, unguarded, unstoppable. Ava stood frozen until her father turned and pulled her into his arms. The gallery erupted again, a wave of applause rolling through the courtroom. Reporters flooded the aisles. Even the jurors wiped their eyes. Prosecutor Grant Allen quietly packed his papers, his perfect conviction record shattered. Jack Reynolds sat rigid, pale, already calculating the odds of survival. Judge Clark continued, her tone steady. "This court will forward all evidence of misconduct, bribery, and obstruction of justice to the State Attorney General for immediate investigation." She looked directly at Harris. "Justice doesn't fail because of one man. It fails when everyone else stays quiet." When the Taylors walked out of that courthouse, Cleveland was waiting. Cameras flashed like lightning. Microphones crowded their faces. Ava spoke first, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "My father is innocent, but this isn't just about him. It's about every family who never got their day in court. Today isn't victory. It's accountability." Dylan placed a hand on her shoulder. "She taught me that courage is contagious," he said, voice breaking. "And knowledge, that's freedom." The crowd cheered as they descended the steps together. The worker who stood for safety and the daughter who turned the law inside out. 6 months later, the tailor's apartment looked different. Same four walls, but now filled with framed newspaper headlines and letters from across the country. Teen lawyer exposes corrupt judge. 17-year-old wins case that shook Ohio. Harvard Law creates new scholarship for Ava Taylor. The same war and law books still line the shelf, but now they shared space with awards and thank you notes from strangers. One from a single mother read, "Because of you, my son's retrial got the truth it deserved." Dylan was back on site, not as a worker, but as a safety supervisor, ensuring no crew ever had to face what he did. Renee had reduced her shifts and was finally smiling again. And Ava was packing for Harvard. "Dad," she said, folding a hoodie into her suitcase, "you know what I'm proudest of?" He looked up. "What's that?" "You didn't just survive the system. You inspired me to change it." He chuckled. "No, baby girl. You changed it already." Ava smiled, running her hand over the worn spine of constitutional law. "The same book that started it all. You once said knowledge is the one thing they can't take away. You were wrong." Dylan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, they can take it," she said softly, "if you don't pass it on." Weeks later, at Harvard Law School's orientation, Ava stood before a hall full of brilliant students. But when it was her turn to speak, she didn't talk about grades or ambition. "Some of us study justice," she said, "because we've seen what happens when it's missing. The most powerful force in any courtroom isn't money or rank. It's someone who refuses to be silent." Applause erupted. Cameras clicked. And for a second, she saw her father's reflection in the back row, nodding proudly. As she stepped off the podium, a reporter stopped her. "Ava, what's next?" She smiled. "Rebuilding trust. One case at a time." Weeks later, in a quiet interview filmed for the Black Rise channel, Ava sat beneath soft lighting and looked straight into the camera lens. Her voice was calm, but it carried the echo of everything she'd survived. "They underestimated a black girl with law books," she said. "They thought silence was obedience. But silence is just a breath before truth." She leaned forward. "What are they underestimating about you?" The frame froze there, her eyes sharp, determined as the music swelled. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. If this story moved you, smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another pulse-pounding cinematic tale from Black Rise. Here's a quick question for you. If you were in Ava's shoes, would you have risked everything to expose the truth? Sometimes justice isn't served, it's fought for. And courage is the verdict that changes everything.